Hello everybody, welcome back to the channel. Today I'm going to be painting an Assault Squad for the Ultramarines chapter, turning them from this into this. I've had these models for a long time, and as with some of my previous videos, I've decided it's about time I put some paint on them. So the first thing is I gave the model a slightly darker undercoat than I had in the past, so I used deep blue from Army Painter. I then set about blocking in all of the armour panels using Ultramarines blue. This is not something I would normally do when painting Ultramarines because I find this is quite a purple shade. It's not really a classic blue, but because these are older models and they're a bit special, I thought, I'd actually paint them with Ultramarines blue to see how it went. I'm trying to be as neat as possible and leave some of the deep blue in the recesses as well for shading rather than using a wash. Now the next step I did was to block in all of the areas of the model that are going to be metallic with black. You can use any black, I'm using Army Painter, but it doesn't matter. You will only need one coat. I think the main thing here I would say is to keep it neat so that you're not spoiling some of the work you've already done on the armour. So just take your time with a fairly detailed brush and just paint all of the areas that are going to be very dark or black or metallic, and just try and stay in the lines as much as possible. I did paint all of the segments of the armour as well as the bottom of the feet as well. Some of them are quite tricky to get to, but with a bit of patience you should be alright. Now I sometimes debate how good black is for an undercoat for silvery metallic colours. It might be better to use a grey or a dark grey because that's a bit closer to the actual colour that the areas are going to end up. So that might be something to think about, and I might try that in future and just see if it makes it a little bit easier to actually paint the metallics on and get a smooth finish. Now speaking of grey undercoats, for the jetpacks I wanted to do them a little bit more vibrant than perhaps is normally the case. I wanted to do them a yellow colour with hazard stripes. Now for the yellow I did need a lighter undercoat, so I've used ash grey, which has pretty good coverage and does only need about 2 coats to get a good even smooth finish. And then I was using deep yellow from Vallejo for the actual exhaust as well of the jetpack. Now as with all yellows, this is fairly tedious to use. I did about maybe 3 or 4 coats, maybe even 5 on some areas, quite thin down. It did cover quite well, but it did get a bit streaky, so you have to be patient and do more than one area. You'll notice here as well, it's jumped ahead because I changed my mind about the power fist. In the end, I decided I was going to do a yellow as well. So you can already see the hazard stripes on the jetpack, but I will be going over how I did that a little bit later in the video. So initially the power fist was blue, but now I decided it would look better to be yellow, which will also match the theme of the rest of the squad, where they've got yellow close combat weapons with hazard stripes on them. So once I've done all of the yellow, I decided to do the highlighting on the armour. I used a 75% Ultramarines blue and 25% electric blue mix. Both of those are Army Painter colours. I find the key thing when doing edge highlighting is to use a really good quality brush that doesn't have any splits in it, and also to get the consistency of the paint right. I use a wet palette, and it can be quite tricky sometimes to get the wateriness of the paint to the right level. You don't want it too thick because if you do it will blob, and it will also be much harder to control on the brush. But likewise you don't want it too thin because when it's thin it's very translucent, so you have to do more than one coat, so that means there's more chance of errors, and also it can then run into any crevices or anything like that. And obviously you're edge highlighting, so there's going to be a lot of work near these crevices, so you don't want the paint to go in there at all. So once you do get a nice consistency for the paint, you'll probably notice it's actually a lot easier to edge highlight than if you just slop it on and haven't really worked on the quality of the paint that you're using. Even so though, edge highlighting isn't one of my favourite things, and to be honest, as long as it looks okay, I'm kind of happy with it. I won't spend too much time. If I do make any errors, I'll just go back over it with the base coat. Now for the hazard stripes on the jetpacks, I used just black, and again, I think the key here is to choose your starting point and your ending point for where you want the stripe to go. Do an initial thin line between those 2 points, And then once you've kind of accurately got that line in place, you can then bulk it out a bit by doing more lines over the top. But it's not easy, you know. As long as it looks okay, I think that people kind of appreciate the effort you've put in, even if it's not perfect. I do see some people doing perfect hazard stripes, but to be honest with you, I can't be bothered to put that amount of effort in. As long as it looks okay, I'm happy with it. And if I saw anyone else's model with hazard stripes on it, I'd probably just say well done for trying, and that would be it really. The power fist itself wasn't too difficult actually. I thought that was going to be harder than the jetpack nozzles, but it actually wasn't. It was quite easy. I just did an initial triangle at the bottom and then worked from there. So used each previous line as my reference for the next line. As long as they're all fairly accurate, then that means each following line should also be accurate. But once you start noticing that your lines get thicker, you'll notice that gradually, you know, the uniformity goes and it starts to look a bit of a mess. So if you did really look at my models, you probably would notice that the hazard stripes aren't the same thickness, but I'm happy with them. And I think that it's not worth the effort to try and get them 100% accurate, because no one's really going to care that much. There might be other ways to do it. You know, I have seen some people using masking to do it, but to be honest, again, the amount of work that's going to take, I wanted to try and do these models as quickly as possible, so I just freehanded it. But whatever works best for you, try different methods. Now, keeping in the theme of using the old kind of colour scheme, I decided to paint the bolt pistol with red, like the old classic artwork. And also for these Marines, I decided that they were going to be third company, so the shoulder pauldron trim was red rather than the classic like yellow or gold, just because everyone paints their Ultramarines with yellow or gold trim. So I wanted to try something a bit different, and also I do like red, it's one of my favourite colours. So I went for red trim to denote the third company. I initially also didn't, well, I forgot that the sergeant is supposed to have a red helmet, so I did all the highlighting on his helmet, and then I remembered, oh, actually the sergeant is supposed to have a red helmet for the Ultramarines, so I had to go back and paint over that, but that's fine. I quite like painting red. I paint quite a lot of Blood Angels, so red's one of my favourite colours to paint. You might notice with this model that I'm avoiding using any washes, because I don't really like the finish you get with washes. I've decided I think it's much better to use a darker undercoat and then try and leave some of that in the recesses. So again, with the helmet, I did a dark red and then lighter red on top, rather than mess around with a wash that creates shininess and all kinds of problems, I find. Now with the eye lenses, there is a good method of doing it, which I'm probably going to do a video on separately. But essentially, you paint the eye lens in total with a darker colour. You then do the very front bottom edge with a lighter colour, a thin line. Then in the middle, you do like a mid-tone. And then the key to it is to do a little white dot in the corner, and then that makes the lens, it does look 3D even if it's not, and is probably the easiest way to get a decent finish on your eye lenses. So I've messed around with different methods over the years, but that's probably the best way. So getting towards the end of the model now, and what I'm doing here is just filling in all of the metallic areas that I previously did black with gunmetal from Army Painter. It's quite a nice colour from them. It does go on quite well. It tends to only need like maybe 1.5 coats, you know, just touching up little areas where it's not quite smooth, but it's pretty good. So I'm just kind of going over all of the metallic areas and just picking out the details as best as possible. For the chest eagle, it's going to be gold. Gold is a very difficult colour to get a good finish on. So first of all, I did the undercoat using like a desert yellow, which is quite a pink yellow, which is quite close to gold in colour. If you were going to do non-metallic metal for this, I probably would start with this. So I did that first to give the gold something to sit on, and then painted over it with gold. It only took one coat of gold on top, and it actually does look quite good. So this is probably what I'd recommend for gold. Brown as well people use, but I think, you know, try and use a colour that's as close to the gold as possible, really, so a yellowy brown. Then for some definition on the chest eagle, I used Ogre in Flesh from Games Workshop. But any kind of brownie or flesh coloured wash would be fine, just to bring out the details on the gold. I then went over all of the metallic areas with Dark Tone from Armour Painter. This does really dull down metallic, so just be careful depending on what kind of finish you're going for. But for me, I don't really like my metallics to be too bright and shiny, even on Space Marine, so that was fine. And it does really go nicely into the recesses to bring out all of the 3D details on there as well. So I covered all of the metallic areas using this, and pretty much just did one coat, and I didn't even really need to do any highlighting on the metal afterwards either. I did tidy up a few bits where it had pulled slightly, but other than that, I just did the wash, let it dry, and that was it. I did notice on one of the models that I thinned down the wash slightly, and actually that did work quite nicely, so it might be worth thinking about. Now, with the basing, I didn't cover that on this video. I probably will do a future video on basing. All in all, I'm pretty happy with how these models came out. And for an old squad that I've had for probably well over a decade, I would have thought I'm quite pleased with these. I think the hazard stripes make them stand out. Transfers as well I used, and that was interesting. I probably will also do a separate video on that, but I wasn't going to freehand all of these symbols. It would have taken far too long. But all in all, I'm very happy with it, and if you did enjoy this video, please consider liking and subscribing. I would really appreciate it. Thanks very much, guys. I'll see you soon.